So the show features a combination of plein air studies and works painted in your studio. How does your process differ when you create both types of paintings?
My studio practice is different than my plein air practice for a number of reasons. First of all, it's impractical to take large, for me at least, to take large canvases outside and to transport them. I could certainly start them outside, but the problem is that I have a sports car and it's not possible to get the canvas to the site or back again. When I paint out of doors, I'm obviously constrained by the light and the amount of time that I have is because of the light. I often will do a grisaille, and for those of you who don't know what that is essentially a monochromatic drawing in paint that sort of sets where things are going to be. And I almost invariably do that, whether I'm in the studio or outside. But outside, of course, must work rather quickly. I don't hesitate to edit when I paint outside. In fact, I have sometimes been known to change things a little bit. There was a reasonably well-known incident among my friends of being at a workshop being given by a friend at a farm in New Hampshire. And at the time I was very interested in painting the sea, and I had been for several weeks. So I went to this workshop, and I knew most of his students, but I took myself off to the side, and in the middle of this hayfield on this bright sunny day, I painted the sea in moonlight, really just to annoy my friend the teacher and to amuse the other students. But all of it is just an armature on which I can hang light, and so I don't feel, unless I'm doing a commission, which I rarely do, that there's any need to have a fidelity to the particular place. I want to get a sense of how I felt there, what the light looked like, and just try and give it a sense of the place.
So one of the things I think we really wanted to talk about was how you've evolved over the years as an artist, because I know that your kind of first love, at least from what I've heard, was the Hudson River School and the Barbizon schools. So I was wondering, over the course of your career, how have you evolved as an artist, and how have your years of experience informed your art-making process, and then if you have any highlights or favorite moments from the course of your career? None.
When I first started doing painting at all, or then mostly watercolor and very bad watercolors, I was still living at home with my parents. I was still a teenager, and I realized that the closer I painted something to looking like it had been done by Andrew Wyeth, the more likely I was to get applause when I carried it up to the living room. So I did this for a while, realizing at a certain stage that there was none of me in this. There was perhaps a little bit of increasing dexterity, but it wasn't very genuine in any sense. After that, I had a number of strange experiences and wound up at Pratt. And I was older than other students, having spent some time in the service, because Uncle Sam had developed a great fondness for my serving. And when I got out of that, I was older than other students. And so I was at Pratt. And I realized that at that time, which was the early 70s, nobody really wanted to teach me to paint representational paintings. And since I was paying for this myself, in combination with the GI Bill, I thought I can't be doing this anymore. So I left and started my art education, which was really haunting museums, buying as many monographs as I could, and just trying to take pictures apart backwards. And since I hadn't really had any training, that was very difficult. Many of you are familiar with reverse painting on glass, where you paint all the highlights and then go back to the other things. Well, this was sort of the way I was taking these paintings apart, trying to think, how did they do that and what's underneath it? And of course, they didn't always want to show me what was underneath it. But in any event, that's how I began. And I was living in the Hudson Valley at the time, and so it was an obvious choice for me to make. At the time I was doing that in the early 70s, traditional landscape painting was not something that you really saw very much of, except at perhaps an extreme amateur level. It was not something that people took tremendously seriously. The good part of that was that I had very little competition, and The bad part was that there was no place that I felt that I could go and learn how to do this, and so it took me a long time to find little, even technical things that someone could have told me in an afternoon. So there were a lot of tears and a lot of anger, and but as time goes on, you know, it gets better. I think that a lot of people, particularly younger people, often talk to me about how you get started in your career, and mine really was entirely accidental. I had gone to see a gallery on Madison Avenue in New York, and the young woman who was running it asked me to bring in some paintings. And so I was living about an hour and a half out of New York, and I drove my paintings in, carried in this cardboard box. They were all in tag sale frames, and mostly sort of nicked up. But I go into the gallery, and when I'm supposed to be there, and she's on the telephone, and she points down like this for me to put the paintings on the floor, and so I did. And she's looking like this all the while talking to her friend. And she finally looks at me, puts her hand over the phone and says, "I don't think so, but thank you." I walked out onto Madison Avenue, and I just burst into tears. I continued down Madison Avenue. I got to 57th Street, and there used to be then a gallery run by a fellow named Peter Tatishchev, a tiny gallery, and I went in there, and he said, "Well, let me see what you have." And I hadn't mentioned that I wanted to show anything. So we looked at it, and he said, "Well, I'll tell you what, we'll take these for 6 months, and we'll see what happens, and then see what happens." And so while I'm there, Steve Doherty, who was then the editor of American Artist, came in, giving a copy of the magazine to Peter, because one of his artists was in it, and he looked at the paintings, and he said, found out how to get in touch with me, and he said, "I'll be in touch with you." So I got a notice from him shortly afterwards, in fact from a fellow who was a writer for them, saying they'd like to come up to the country to do an article. And I thought, huh? I just got pounced by this lady who couldn't get off the phone, and now I'm going to be an American artist. Almost 10 days later, I get a call from, no, I guess a letter from John Pence in San Francisco inviting me to have a one-man show, which was also coincident with when this magazine was coming out. So you can see that it was a lot of very careful planning on my part that got me started. I had been the beneficiary of a great number of fortunate things. Mm. My advice to people starting out is more, make sure that everything you send out is as good as you can possibly make it. Make sure that anyone who's looking at it can easily find out who painted it, and just keep yourself in front of people as much as you can. It's very hard, and as you all know, it can be very lonely, but it's tremendously rewarding when something you've made out of dirt in your hands finds a home.
I think along the lines of that particular question, that, you know, getting started in your career seemed to happen, you know, kind of without much planning or trying on your part. You know, the actual mechanics of the start of your career were kind of by chance. Do you think that, well, I'm interested in terms of the way your style has evolved through your career. Did that happen organically, or were there decisions that you made to try to paint like this, or try to paint like that, or attain this thing, or try that thing, or? Okay,
I guess to go back about it being reasonably by happenstance, I was working as the assistant manager of a lumberyard in the Hudson Valley, in fact, right literally on the Hudson River. And my boss was fired one Labor Day, and I had a chance to quit on principle. I had no money in the bank, and I knew I wasn't really quitting on principle. I was really quitting to paint, but I never could have justified it without some external thing. So I quit my job at Labor Day this year and went to the local art association and asked if I could have the space to have a show on Friday night and the Saturday at Thanksgiving time. And they said yes, I could. And I did. And that was was Labor Day of 1979, and I, knock on wood, haven't had a grown-up job since then. But one of the things I discovered, since I had no money in the bank, was that I had to learn how to paint very quickly, learn very quickly, and also paint very quickly, but also that I was now entirely responsible for learning what I needed to learn in order to keep myself alive. And I learned quickly that what I was painting, let's say the first week in December, was important because I could take the day off, I could take the next 2 days off. But sometime in March I was going to wonder why I didn't have any dinner. And so I was able then to draw a direct line between working hard and feeding myself. Stylistically, I started doing my rather fake Hudson River School paintings, which were even still somewhat more modern than Hudson River School, and it was largely because I couldn't paint at that stage as carefully as was necessary to really make a Hudson River School painting. And I painted a painting from a place called Artist Rock near Haines Falls, and it was maybe 20 by 40 inches. And I put my brushes down and I thought, okay, I gave myself a diploma and I said, now I don't have to do that anymore. They were, in conception, really too grand for me. I tend to be much more intimate in terms of what I paint. I may sometimes paint vistas, but I rarely paint them on a very large size. I became very much enamored of the Barbizon painters. That also related to the fact that I loved 17th century Dutch painting. I didn't follow much of that. I would look at Ruysdael for sure. But landscape painting, other than perhaps Van Gogh at that time, didn't really impact me. But it's that whole sense of craft and light that I so love in 17th century Dutch painting, plus the fact that all the paintings were tremendously accessible. They, of course, were direct precursors to the Barbizon painters. Barbizon painters then, in fact, of course, except for the few who denied them, were precursors to the Impressionists, but certainly to American Impressionism. And that's sort of where I stuck for a long time. My paintings often look like they were painted now, rather than that they were necessarily Barbizon paintings that somebody happened to find in their attic. I don't know what it is that makes them not quite look like that. I'm happy in the sense that it distinguishes them, perhaps, but certainly a lot of what animates me to paint comes from that tradition.